So today, what we want to begin to process is what I like to call end game thinking. I think that a lot of people don't do this. I think that a lot of people, they just kind of deal, a lot of leaders get caught up in the moment and they just kind of deal with the struggles, with the issues that are going on in a given day. When you get caught in the day to day, watch, you allow the urgent to overcome the important. And a lot of leaders do this. And because perhaps you have just a natural leadership gift. And when you have a natural leadership gift and you get caught in the urgent, you can find yourself just dealing with things. And you're dealing with them so well that the organization is still moving forward. The organization is still growing. Things are going fine. And you think everything's okay. But the problem is when you are simply dealing with the urgent every day, you're allowing the urgent, the loudest thing, to become the most important thing. I've heard people say before, do loudest first, do most painful first, do easiest first, do hardest first. No, none of those matter. Do most important first. But before you can establish what is most important, you got to establish what your long-term goal is. You've got to establish the end game. The more you can start by thinking of end game, the more you can assess where you need to end up, the better off your long term is going to be because you'll know how to adjust along the way. Moses Moses, by inspiration from God on Mount Sinai, was able to do this extremely well. When Moses got the law and he began to hear from God what needed to happen, Moses immediately began to establish a new way of thinking. And he established things that exist to this day. God had delivered the children of Israel from Egypt by all of the plagues. And the final plague was the plague of the death angel, which took away the firstborn of Egypt, the firstborn of every human, the firstborn of every animal. It took away the firstborn. In doing this, God established a truth, a reality that we need to process, and that Moses made a given part of the nation of Israel because he understood what the end game was. You see, Moses was just entering the desert with all of these people that did not know how to be a nation. But he did not simply look at the desert and see the desert as the end game. Moses, in that moment, saw Jerusalem. He didn't know the name of it. He didn't know where it would be. He'd never been to the promised land, but he saw it. He looked forward and he saw a nation occupying the land God had promised them. He saw the end game from the beginning. When you can do that, you'll establish truths and patterns. You'll establish norms that will carry you well throughout the process, throughout the growth of your organization. So let's do this. I'm going to be in Numbers chapter 13, and it's verses 1 through 16. So watch here. Look at this. The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belong to me, whether human or animal." Now, God is establishing something here. He's beginning to establish the idea of first belongs to God. I need you to understand, God is always first. Why? Because he's God. God is always first. He cannot occupy any other position. It's not that he's demanding to be first. He just is. He's just first. Listen, on a very small scale. I've pastored at New Life for 21 years now. And I everybody that's here, I hired or I trained or I somehow raised. All of those things are true now because I've been here a long time. When I walk into a room and sit down, it doesn't matter where at the table I sit. If I desire that to be the head of the table, it becomes that immediately just because I'm there, because of who I am. That's a very small example in a very small microcosm called a church. And yet God occupies a seat that he doesn't even have to demand it. If God sits down where he sits is the head of the table because God is always first. He's beginning to establish this in the thinking of the Israelites. And it's important that they get it because long term, they're going to need to understand the importance of who their God is. Because look, they are not a people who are going to just create a given nation or any other nation. They are the people of God, and they are going to function as that. So he says, consecrate to me the firstborn of every womb. Then Moses said to the people, commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. God's establishing another thing here that Moses is going to show them. It's another imagery that God has. Yeast, biblically, from this point on, yeast will be viewed as sin. Yeast will be a symbol of sin. It's not that they don't use yeast. They do. But when they have purification feasts like the Passover, they don't use yeast, because what the Bible says to us is sin is like yeast. A little of it affects the entire lump of dough. You don't have to put very much yeast to completely change the nature of the entire lump of dough. You don't have to put much sin to completely change the nature of the individual or of the group or of the organization. The truth is that God is beginning to teach them another lesson here. You are to have bread without yeast. Today, in the month of Aviv, you are leaving. When the Lord brings you, listen, when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, the land he swore to you, to your ancestors, to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you are to observe this ceremony in this month. Now watch. It says, when the Lord brings you into the land. In other words, Moses is already seeing the end result. Moses is looking forward, and he is establishing a culture, a ritual that will remind them when they are comfortable of what God did for them when they were troubled. These kind of rituals are important. These kinds of memories are important. These kinds of ceremonies and celebrations are important because they remind us of where we came from. And if you can think end game from the beginning, you will find it so much easier to continue, because you will establish ceremonies that remind people of what you were after from the very start of what you're doing. And when you can do that, you travel better. Watch. For 7 days, this is during this month, every year, for 7 days, eat bread made without yeast, purification. And on the seventh day, hold a festival to the Lord. Eat unleavened bread. That means without yeast. Eat unleavened bread during those 7 days. Nothing with yeast in it is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders. When this is celebrated, literally they go through their house and they clean their homes, they clean their tents as they're in the desert. But once they establish in Israel, they clean their house and they check every cabinet, and they make sure all the yeast is out of the church. On that day, on the seventh day, when you have the celebration, on that day, tell your son. Now listen, the Old Testament is very male-centric. The Bible, interestingly enough, gives women a larger role than almost any other system of thought or any other religion or any other sacred writing of its time. But even that is still very male-centric. So you need to understand that. So hear this a different way. On that day, tell your children, okay? I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. You hear what he's saying? Remind your kids what God did for you. Because if your kids know what God did for you, they'll have faith in what God can do for them. He's saying, tell your children what God has done. Show your kids what God did. It matters that you do this. Tell your children, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. This observance will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead that this law of the Lord is to be on your lips. For the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. You must keep this ordinance at the appointed time, year after year. Listen to what it says. After the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites and gives to you, as he promised on oath to you and your ancestors, you are to give over to the Lord the first offspring of every womb. Now, everybody prepare yourself. We're going to read an ancient text, okay? It's an ancient text. All the firstborn males of your livestock belong to the Lord. Redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey. In other words, the donkey is helpful. The donkey is a work animal. The lamb is a food animal. So what God is saying to them is, you don't have to lose the firstborn of your work animals, but redeem it, replace it, buy it out with a lamb. Redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey. But if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Now, everybody pause. Wait. I know you're thinking, okay, hold up. Ancient text. Understand that this kind of worship was common in almost every religious structure of the time. All you had to offer to your gods were animals, were the produce of your field or the produce of your flocks, and so these would be offered to God. Listen, this was your money. It was the way you exchanged goods. You didn't exchange necessarily. Well, I mean, they had coins, but most of the time it was bartering. And so what you did with God was, instead of bringing him dollars in a modern sense, you brought him produce. You brought him produce from your flocks or produce from your field. And you gave that over to God. Part of it was burned and was given to God as a burnt offering. As the smoke rises to heaven, it brings glory to him. Part of it was kept in the temple to feed the priests and the temple workers, or to feed the poor in the community. So the sacrifice was for God. Now watch. If you don't redeem it, break its neck. That's how serious God is about this. Now watch. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. You got to do this for your sons too, though you don't break their necks. You redeem them with it. You give God an offering to thank him for your children. When your sons ask you, what does this mean? Say to them, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb, and redeem each of my firstborn sons. And it will be like a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand. Now listen, don't get caught up in the animals or the animal cruelty, or don't. This is an ancient text. Remember that. But look at what Moses just did. Moses just said, we are going to take the land. And when we do, we are going to establish a ritual that reminds us. Watch. You need to start with the goal. The goal is simply a question of, where are we going? The more you can start with the end and goal in mind, the more you can travel a direct line to that end goal. You've got to establish the goal from the very beginning. I think sometimes groups or people, they establish a short-term goal and then run a long-term organization. Their short-term goal may be, we got to pay our bills. We've got to catch up with this. We got to do this. We got to pay the rent. We got to pay the mortgage. We got to pay the salaries. We got to pay the staff. We got to pay the electric bill. And so what they do is they get to the point where, okay, we're paying all that. Well, what now? What now? If you don't have an end goal that is big enough, you'll get there too quickly and it'll all be over with. When I was pastoring a church in North Carolina, the first time Tina and I interviewed, they gave us a long list of all these things that needed to be done to the building and the parsonage. And it was all physical plant issues. And so we got all of that done. And we got a lot of it done in the first 6-8 months. And then 6 years in, we got the rest of, we finished the list. Folks, when we finished that list, the church sat down and said, good, Pastor, you do anything you want to. We'll sit over here and pray for you. The church stopped striving because they arrived at their promised land. They had accomplished what their goal was. I made the mistake of not establishing a big enough goal from the beginning. And therefore, they didn't see anything beyond these little tasks that they wanted set. You've got to set a goal that is an end goal, not a short-term goal. Moses is setting here the goal for when you are in the land. Now, they're barely out of Egypt. And Moses is saying, when you are in the land, here's what you're going to do. And he's already setting a goal way, way out there. The reality. You can set the goal way out there, but the reality is the question of where are we now? You got to be honest about this. Now listen, you've got to set the goal far enough out, but you've got to be very honest about where you are right now. Because if you're not honest about where you are right now, you can't decide what the next steps should be. The reality is, where am I right now? And listen, where is Moses? Moses is in a desert with a bunch of slaves who have just been set free, who don't know how to run a nation, who don't know how to run an organization, and who don't know how to survive out here. They've never had to do that. And that's where he is right now. He is not in a place that has a high percentage possibility of succeeding. He actually is in a spot that has a high level of possibility of failing. And yet that's where he is. But he doesn't talk about that. He talks about the end goal. We're going there. We are here. We're dusty. We're lost. We're disorganized. We're unprepared. But where are we going? We will be a nation with its own land. That's where we're going. The reality is, where are we now? Now, let me just show you something. If you were here in the office with me, I would do this. But what you've really got to do here is you've got to establish your goal. So if I put my goal all the way up here, that's the goal. This is where I want to end up here, right? If I want to end up here, okay, got it. That's where I want to end up. I want to be, when I first came to Southern Maryland, we're going to be the largest church in Southern Maryland, and we're going to plant churches. Okay, so that's our goal. At the time, I had to establish who we were. So this is where we are. This is our reality. Okay, our reality was that we were 100 people in one service, and we didn't have enough money to pay our bills. That was our reality. Dusty, lost, incapable, unprepared. But where are we going to be? A nation in a promised land. We were 100 people that could not pay their bills, but we were going to be the largest church in Southern Maryland. We were going to plant churches. Okay? So because I had established this and we were realistic about this, the next step here, and we had to create a path. The next step was easy enough. I said, okay, let's do this. And we began making decisions. Now, over time, what happens is, we move from here to here, but then what happens is reality shifts on you. It might drop you to here. That's okay, as long as you still see the goal out here. If you have set the end game goal, if you have done the work of end game thinking, even when the winds of chance blow you off course, you still know where to go, because you've established a North Star. If you don't have this and you start wandering around, you could spend your entire career just kind of wandering around down here. That's not helpful. What you need to know is, when you get blown off course, maybe you're here now and you've just established, well, that's where I'm at. This is my new reality. But here is still my end goal. So now I'm going to shoot for something that takes me that direction. And maybe I get a number of years or a number of decisions that get me closer and closer, and it happens quickly. And then maybe something drops me down and I end up back here. But I still have the goal. And look, let me show you something. Even though this feels like a failure, I'm closer than I was here. That's how this will work for you if you will do the work of endgame thinking. You've got to do that. And you've got to not only, look, you got to talk about your goal, your end goal, where are we going? You got to talk about your reality, where are we now? But you've also got to consider your community. How are we feeling? I looked at the community when I first got here. God gave us a huge blessing. We had a church that was ready to see this. They were ready to go. They were ready to grow. They were ready to see God do powerful things. And because the community was behind us, we could make decisions faster. Listen, if the community is behind you, you can make quick decisions and big changes. If they're not, you're going to have to make slower decisions and smaller changes. It's not that you're not going to get there. You've just got to move at the right pace. You see, if you don't consider the community, you'll just blow the whole thing up. And that's not what you need. You need the organization to move forward. And yes, you may be in a situation that allows you to move quickly, and praise God. But you may also be in a situation that asks you to move slowly. Praise God and keep moving. Listen, in the end, the plan tells us what the next steps are. The plan says, hey, I'm here. I need to get here. Here's my next step. I'm going to take this one. You might even sit down and establish, look, you might start here and you're establishing step 1, step 2, and you've got all this plan to take you directly to the goal, right? You may have all of that worked out. You may have all of that in your plan. But in the end, this will get set off course. But as long as you've got this established right here, that end goal established, you're still going to know what to do next. Establish the plan. What are the best next steps each time? Yes, you'll have to readjust. Yes, you'll have to consider. Yes, you'll have to reconsider this, that, or the other thing. Because you've got to, watch, reevaluate regularly. Remember, God's end game thinking is far beyond yours. God's got a plan to take you all the way to the promised land. You may have a plan to get you to next year, but God's got a plan to take you all the way to the promised land. So set up ceremonies, set up reminders, establish from the beginning, that's where we're going. And then set up something that constantly and regularly reminds you of that end goal so that as you set your plan in place, if it works perfectly, praise God. If you get knocked off course, you still have a direction and you still have a way to get to the end goal that you know God set for you. End game thinking, it will get you there. First day we arrived in Southern Maryland, I looked at them and I said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to hold a banquet at the end of the year. I'd just gotten there. We're going to hold a banquet at the end of the year, a black tie banquet. And we're going to celebrate the fact that God has provided everything we needed to make it through this year. Y'all, from a human standpoint, there was no way that was possible. But November of that year, we held that black tie banquet, and we had paid every payroll, we had paid every bill, and we had money left in the bank, and the church was larger, significantly larger than it was when we started. God provided. Establish an end game goal. Establish a plan to remind your people what that end game goal is. And then establish where you are. Set your plan and reevaluate the plan regularly, always remembering where you're going. End game thinking. It'll get you there.